Hey there everybody, Sage Apopum here, founder of the School of Evolutionary Herbalism. And in this week's blog episode, I wanted to talk about the importance of being able to see the connection between what's going on in our physical bodies with our thoughts, our emotions, and ultimately to our soul's development here on this Mother Earth. You know, last week I was talking a bit about medical astrology and how the astrological model gives us as herbalists this incredibly powerful tool and framework for developing a truly holistic model, in the sense that we see the whole person and the whole plant in connection to the wholeness of nature. And you know, people ask me all the time, like, how does that work? Like, how exactly does medical astrology work? And how does it allow us to see that connection between kind of the physical symptoms of our body and the patterns that we experience throughout our lives in terms of our emotions and our feelings and our thinking, and how that relates to our spiritual development? And you know, one of the ways that I like to think of this is just basically looking at the human being, right? And thinking through what are the main organizational levels of our being, right? Like how is a human being put together, so to speak? And one of the most simple ways of approaching that is based on a threefold model used in the Western alchemical tradition, where they say that everything in nature is composed of these three philosophical principles, what they refer to as sulfur, mercury, and salt. And those correlate to the soul, the spirit, and the body, respectively. And in terms of that, just real quick, that difference between the soul and the spirit, you know, in the Western alchemical model, you know, the spirit, it kind of relates to our psychological processes, our feelings, our emotions, and to that vital force that kind of animates our body. You know, they say that there's one universal spirit that moves through all things, whereas the soul is our own unique individual expression of consciousness. It's our unique purpose and path in this life. It's you know, our soul is one of a kind and unique unto itself. It's like my soul is different from your soul, is different from their soul, and everyone has their own unique soul, but there's one universal spirit that unites and connects us all. So I really like having that orientation around, like, what is the holistic person, right? We've got our body, we've got our mind and our heart, our feelings, and then we also have our soul. And the astrological lens enables us to see all three of those layers of a person, specifically through the birth chart, right? And so a lot of folks are like, how does astrology work? You know, like how is it that a planet way out there in the cosmos can directly affect us down here on Earth? And you know, there's a lot of argument on that topic of discussion. It's a big one. You know, a lot of folks out there really want some sort of scientific proof and understanding, and I'm not sure that there is super solid scientific, linear, analytical, reductionistic proof of exactly how astrology works. From my understanding of it, there are theories of it being based on electromagnetic wavelengths being emitted by these planets that then are received here on Earth and affect life on Earth, right? And everything in nature has an electromagnetic dimension to it, and all electromagnetic wavelengths convey information and influence physical matter. But from looking at the tradition of astrology, you know, they say that, and I'm just for clarity's sake, I'm really referring to our Western tradition of astrology, tropical astrology. That is the tradition that was used in Western alchemy and used throughout the Renaissance era practice of medical astrology, which is the primary way that I've been trained in medical astrology. So that's kind of the system that I'm approaching this with. But they say that, at the moment you're born, the planets and are moving through these signs of the zodiac with the turning of the seasons. It's based on the solstice and the equinox, right? That cardinal cross of the turning of the seasons, and those planetary powers are moving at certain rates through those archetypes of the signs, right? And in tropical astrology, we're not looking at planets in actual star constellations. That's the dominion of sidereal astrology. In Western astrology, we're really looking at seasonal patterns here on Earth. And because the orientation of tropical astrology is more Earth-centric, it tends to have more of a physiological orientation as compared to a sidereal system of astrology. And my primary teacher in medical astrology, Judith Hill, who is well versed in both sidereal or the Jyotish system as well as tropical, she says that for medical purposes, the tropical system is actually much more well developed and refined and precise than the sidereal system of astrology. Both are great, both are accurate, both are profound, but the way I was trained is that tropical model is more preferable to the sidereal system for medical purposes. But anyways, a little digression there, but I say that when we're born, that moment we take our first breath of life, those astral influences, these archetypal forces, as represented by the planets and the signs, kind of stamp their influence upon us. And their influences are determining a majority of the factors of our life, right? In the sense of our body, our constitution, how our organ systems function. Maybe some of us are excessive in some areas of the body or deficient or weak in other parts of the body. It's like, why is it that some people are really prone to wet, phlegmy coughs? And why are some people prone to hyperinflammatory allergic conditions? And why are some people prone to digestive problems and others are prone to thyroid problems, right? It's like, what is it that makes us predisposed to certain types of disease? From the medical astrology model, it's based on how those planets and signs are oriented in our birth chart, which lead to certain excesses and deficiencies that we express. For those of you familiar with the Ayurvedic model, they say that we have a core constitution that we're born into, and they call that our prakriti, right? Our great nature, our own unique nature. And in astrology, we could see that prakriti, that core constitution, is represented by our birth chart. But then as we go throughout living our lives and, thinking certain ways and feeling certain ways and living in a certain environment and eating certain foods and, developing certain habits and patterns and rhythms, that constitution changes, right? That we get these different influences change, kind of putting layers on top of that core constitution, and sometimes that becomes pathological. And in Ayurveda, they refer to that as our vikruti, or our assumed constitution that is layered on top of our innate constitution. In astrology, this is represented by transits, right? So you have your core basic natal chart, but those forces are continuing to move and influence us. And so as those transits happen, it's changing the way that our body is functioning. And they say that the natal chart is like it's like a garden, and it's all these seeds planted, and the transits are like the weather, the how much sun is it getting, and how much moisture is it getting, and which seeds are we watering, and are they going to grow strong and healthy or not? And a lot of that is determined by how we choose to respond to these astrological influences that we face. And so the thing is that the chart equally represents our bodies, our psychology, as well as our soul. So it's one map, one blueprint that represents the wholeness of who we are. Or from the alchemical perspective, it represents the salt, the mercury, and the sulfur level of our being. And in that way, what it does is it allows you to see connections. It allows us to see the relationship between the lessons that our soul needs to learn to further its growth and development, and connecting that to the structure of our mind and the way our thoughts are and the way our feelings are, and then connects that to the state of our body, right? Either our state of health or lack of health. And so it becomes this incredibly precise tool to allow you to see those connections. And I think this is really important because it's really easy and common for us to see, the spirit over here and the mind over here and the body over here, and to kind of compartmentalize them, to like put little boxes around them and to isolate them from one another. But in holistic medicine, we really see, or just holistic approaches to life, we see that the body is just the most fixed or condensed material aspect of the soul. And conversely, our soul is the most volatile or subtle or ethereal aspect of the body. They're not separate. It reminds me of this great saying from Osho, and he says, the human being is an organic unity unto itself. That, when we say body, mind, and soul, he's like, the little commas between body, comma, mind, comma, and soul. He's like, the little comma and the space and the and is really dangerous because it makes us think of them as separate. He says, it should really just be body, mind, soul, like one word, body, mind, soul, and to represent the wholeness of who we are. But ultimately, as an organic unity unto ourselves, that we're not just a wholeness unto ourselves, but we're connected to these greater forces of nature, which includes the cosmos, right? It includes these celestial forces represented by the astrological pattern. And so when we're looking at a person as an herbalist, when we're working with a person in a clinical context, our goal is always to find the root cause, right? We don't want to just put band-aids on symptoms, or definitely not suppress symptoms, and certainly we don't want to give herbs that might harm someone or lead to further imbalance. We need to really be able to work with someone in a way where we can figure out what's going on, like what's going on that's creating the problems that they're having. And it can be really easy to look at those three little boxes, those seemingly separate parts of the self, as where the root cause is. Like we can, think of, there's a physical problem, so the root cause must be on a physical level. Or, there's a spiritual problem or a psychological issue, so the root of it must be on the psychological level. But really, they can cross over between one another because they're not separate, right? A great example of this is with common symptoms associated with food intolerance. One of the main symptoms that people get after doing like a 6-week elimination diet, and they're eliminating foods that they're allergic or intolerant to, and they test those foods, they reincorporate those foods. Maybe they eat the gluten or the dairy or the corn or the soy or whatever it is they have problems with. Very commonly, one of the first symptoms that they get is irritability and kind of a lack of concentration and brain fog, kind of lack of focus, or even things like anxiety or depression. So those are like psychological dynamics, but the root of it is on this physiological level. So, and the other thing of this is that it's really common in more, new age approaches to spirituality, or kind of more esoteric approaches to health, that, they say all disease is rooted on a spiritual level or on an emotional level and trickles down to affect the body. And yes, that is true, but one of the great sayings in alchemy and astrology is as above, so below, but as within, so without, as below, so above. It's like it's a mirror. And so, yes, a disease can be rooted on the spiritual or psychological or emotional level and gradually trickle down to affect the body. But the reverse is also true, right? That something going on in the body can move up and affect our mind and our emotions and our spirit. One example of that, aside from food intolerance, is, thinking of someone with chronic pain. Someone that has chronic, severe pain all the time in their physical body. It's very common for them to get depressed about it. Maybe they love to go skiing or hiking or, play sports with their kids, and, then they have this chronic pain and they can't do those things, and that can be kind of depressing, right? And so that's just another example of how a physical thing can really affect the mind and our psyche. So one of the things that's so cool about the astrological model is that it's our Western system of energetic anatomy and physiology, right? Each of the archetypes in astrology, the planets and the elements and the signs, all relate to certain organ systems and tissue types and parts of the body. But they also represent psychological functions. They represent emotional states. They represent lessons that we have to learn as a soul. And so what this enables us to do is when someone has a constitutional weakness or they have chronic issues in a certain part of the body, it enables us to see through seeing the astral ruler of that part of the body. Say, for example, the liver, and how the liver is attributed to Jupiter. Well, now, if someone has chronic liver stuff going on, we can start to see, what's the pattern of Jupiter and how it's relating in their psyche and on their soul. And so, a lot of times we turn to Eastern systems of medicine for that kind of an understanding, right? Where we, look at the Chinese model and the way they understand the organs and their connections to the 5 elements and these phases of transformation and the seasons and how they relate to psychological and emotional dynamics, or Ayurveda and how they relate the doshas and the dhatus, the tissues and constitutions, to these psycho-spiritual patterns. A lot of folks don't realize that we have a very refined system of that in the West as well, and it is medical astrology. So it becomes this incredibly powerful tool that's very similar to, looking at the meridians or the chakras, right? I mean, it's the same pattern, really. We think of, in medical astrology, there's 7 inner planets, the sun, the moon, Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury. Well, in the Vedic system, they have 7 chakras, right? In medical astrology, we've got 12 signs of the zodiac. Chinese medicine has 12 meridians that relate to these organ systems. It's the same blueprint, the same map, the same architecture of the human being, just looked at through a slightly different lens, slightly different words, slightly different cultural perspectives on it. But when you really get to the root of it, they're talking about the same thing. And I think this is incredibly empowering for folks that would consider themselves Western herbalists, right? That we actually have a very rich, very old tradition of understanding the human being within this greater holistic context that allows us to see those connections between the body, the psyche, and the soul. And, just to share an example of a case study where this was became very, very clear to me is, I love this case study because I share it a lot because I think it illustrates the power of medical astrology in your work with clients. So I had a client one time a few years ago, and she was having chronic urinary tract infections, right? She was getting these really hot, irritated, burning, very uncomfortable urinary tract infections that, she'd get a few of them a year for a number of years. And so we see, the kidneys and the bladder and the ureters, that whole urinary system is weak, right? It's weakened, it's prone to imbalance. And in medical astrology, they say that the kidneys and the urinary tract are ruled by the planet Venus, right? Venus is the archetype associated with harmony and balance and relationship and maintaining balance and harmony in our relationships in our lives, right? And in our mind and kind of in the psyche, it represents our connection to other people or other beings and our ability to really to experience love, right? Love and connection and harmony. And this is why Venus is commonly attributed to the arts, right? Music and dance and creativity, because it's that aesthetic connection, that feeling-based connection with another. And this particular client, when we kind of dug into the case further, it turns out that she was in currently a really unhealthy relationship, right? She was with a person that was abusive, emotionally, sometimes physically, and she felt really stuck, like she didn't know how to get out. She was kind of angry about it and frustrated and scared and didn't know how to get out of this really bad situation. And it wasn't the first time that she had found herself in a relationship of that nature. And so that was another indication that Venus was imbalanced. So what we did is we worked with a particular herbal remedy called cleavers or gallium aperine. And this is a Venusian remedy. It works through the kidneys and urinary tract as a diuretic. And so that relates cleavers to Venus. We also see Venus in the way cleavers grows. It likes to grow in these really lush, moist, beautiful habitats in the forest. For those of you familiar with cleavers, we know one of the biggest signatures of this plant is that it's kind of sticky, right? It's like it clings on to everything. You walk by a cleavers patch and it'll be all over your pants, when you come out of the forest and it's like it wants to come home with you, But that's a signature of this relationship dynamic that cleavers has. It's like the only way it can really grow up is by being in relationship with its, neighboring cleavers or other plants. And that's another signature for Venus, right? And one of the things that we've found, and not just myself, but a lot of clinical herbalists have found, is that cleavers is very specific for helping people that have kind of these attachment issues, right? I mean, it's kind of right there in the signature of the plant. It clings onto things. It has a hard time letting go. And in this context, specifically around relationships, right? People that are in unhealthy relationships that they have a hard time getting out of, they can't navigate through it. There's things get really tangled up in their relationships. And so I administered a spagyric preparation of cleavers, which in short is, the spagyrics are a way of preparing herbal medicines based on the Western alchemical tradition, where you're concentrating the chemistry, the energetics, as well as the spirit of the plant based on its astrological rulerships. And so we administered the cleavers spagyric essence, and the urinary tract infection subsided very quickly. It cooled and soothed everything down, kind of flushed the urinary tract clean. And over time, as she worked with the cleavers, she started to see her whole relationship, her patterning around relationships from a very different orientation, and ultimately ended up getting out of that unhealthy relationship. And she really ended up taking that time that she needed for herself to come back to herself, come back into harmony with her own self, find her own self, and cultivate those virtues within herself that ultimately she would want to have in a partner. And now she is in a very happy, healthy relationship with someone that cherishes her and takes good care of her and loves her dearly, and hasn't had this chronic urinary tract infection issue since then. So what this case illustrates is how we can see this connection, right, that I'm talking about between the body, the spirit, and the soul, and how a holistically prepared herbal medicine can address that, the essence of the pattern, the essence of what's going on, rather than just, given some uva ursi to knock out the UTI. It's like there's something deeper going on here. And what we see is that from an astrological perspective of medicine and healing is that there's these archetypes of astrology sometimes give us a hard time, right? When we're not in harmony with them, when we're not expressing their qualities and characteristics in their most virtuous way, they start to give us a hard time. And sometimes that can lead to them making us sick. And they're trying to ultimately wake us up, right? It's like they're trying to say, hey, you're not living in accordance with my rules, with my law, with my force. And this is a common way of looking at just human life in these Western esoteric traditions, is that our goal as a human being is to come into harmony with all of nature, right? The nature outside of us and the nature inside of us, and to embody and express the highest, most healthiest virtues of these archetypes. And so ultimately what these archetypes are doing is trying to get our attention. They're trying to wake us up. They're trying to say, hey, you need to heal this part of yourself to further in your soul's development. And that really is what I strive to do and strive to teach at the School of Evolutionary Herbalism, is training herbalists in how to see those patterns and be able to use plants in a way that supports not just the physical healing, but that spiritual development side too, because I think that's why we're put here on this earth. I think it's one of the reasons we have this life, is to heal and to grow and to learn and to progress in our soul's development. And the astrological pattern is an incredibly powerful system that enables us to do just that. So I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that. Leave me a comment below. And if you're watching this anywhere but the Evolutionary Herbalism blog, check us out over there at evolutionaryherbalism.com. If you're on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Check out our podcast on Stitcher and iTunes. And you can follow us too and get daily updates on our Instagram and Facebook channels. And thanks so much for tuning in to this recent issue of the Evolutionary Herbalism blog. And I hope that you learned something new here, and this understanding of astrology is maybe starting to open up your lens of perspective and perception on some different approaches and tools that we can gather as herbalists to help people to the best of our abilities. So thanks so much for tuning in. Until next week, take care and be well.